everyone. Today I'm going to show you several watercolor techniques that can be done over a course of a few days. Right here is a completed watercolor techniques sheet done on computer paper. As you can see, the paper is lower quality. Watercolor paper typically is higher quality and it's thick. It won't wrinkle and the colors won't sink in quite as much. So let's get started. A few things that you're going to need today is a watercolor palette. Most watercolor palettes come with a paintbrush. I like to use 2 paintbrushes at one time. I have a fluffy brown bristled brush that I like to use for larger areas, and a smaller synthetic detail brush. You're also going to need a cup of water to dilute your watercolors as well as clean your brush. We're going to use a crayon today for a resist. You can use any light colored crayon. I wouldn't use colors such as blue or black. Those are too dark for a crayon resist. You're also going to need tape. I prefer using painter's tape because it's not as sticky, but you can use any tape that you have with you. You're also going to need a pinch of salt. I just have a basic container of salt. I would put a pinch of salt next to you while you're working to grab it when you're ready. And the last thing you'll need is your watercolor technique sheet. So here's a brand new sheet. You're going to want to start off by writing your first and last name as well as your class section at the top. First, we're going to do a wet on dry technique, which is the most basic technique. You're going to take your paintbrush, dip it in some water. This is how you activate the paintbrush for solid pan watercolors. And you may dip it into any color that you like. I like to dip it in the color and test out the potency on the inside of the palette. You can also test it out on a separate sheet of paper to see how dark or how light the color is. So I'm just going to test out that green, and I'm just going to draw a shape. Okay, and let that dry. I used a diagonal line to separate the box. The first day of techniques, we will paint at the top box. The second day, we will paint at the bottom box. Next, we're going to do a wet on wet technique. This is used when you have large areas of light color. First, you're going to take some water and you will paint it into the box. So I'm just going to paint half of the box with water. Next, you'll pick any color that you like. I'm going to pick orange. And you can paint it directly in the box. Notice it begins to bleed out, and it only bleeds where the water has been painted prior. Next, we're going to do 2 layers. I recommend drawing both shapes on your first day and then adding a second layer on the next time you work on the technique sheet. Again, I'm going to draw some basic shapes. Just going to draw a circle here. And I'm going to use blue and mix it with green to make a blue-green. And I'll draw a triangle. Okay. The next technique is a bit tricky. It's called dry brush. So you want to clean your brush in the water, but you want to dry the brush off with a paper towel. Okay, now you're going to dip the brush in some color. I'm going to use violet. And you want to kind of fan out your bristles. Sometimes you can hold the bristles like this. And I will paint them in the box. You get a really neat technique. It kind of looks like grass or fur. Next, we're going to move to the value scale. The value scale will start with the very lightest value you can create and then the darkest value that you can create. I'm going to start with the lightest, and you can pick any color that you like. I'm going to work with violet. So I'm going to put some water down in my pan, the top of the palette. I'm going to take a little bit of violet, and you can test the color out if you wish. My first box on the left is a very light violet. You can barely see it. Now I'm going to add a little bit more violet into my water. I'm going to grab a bit more water. And again, I might test this out. I'm going to add a little bit more water to it so it's not quite as dark. And this should be good. So it's slightly darker. Going to add a little bit more violet to the next one. And you can go back into these. If one appears a little bit too light, you can darken them up. I might darken this one up just a little bit. Add a little bit more violet to make it darker. That doesn't quite look dark enough, so I'm going to add more violet. It's always better to start light. All right, that looks a little better. And now the next block will be my darkest. So I'm just going to directly paint in. And remember, you can go back into these later. You can go back in today or another day. So you should get a slow progression all the way to the darkest value. And remember, you can use any color for this one. Next, we're going to create a 3D form. We're going to start out by making it a solid color. You can make it any color that you wish. I'm going to try orange. Maybe I'll mix the orange with a little bit of yellow. So I'm going to clean my brush and then add a bit of yellow. Anytime you dip your brush into a new pan, you want to clean it off first. So now I have a yellow orange that I will paint my sphere with. And we're going to let that dry before we add any more color into our sphere. Now we're going to do a resist at the bottom. This is where you need a piece of tape. A masking tape resist can create really sharp edges because the masking tape blocks off the watercolor. Because this is cheaper computer paper, it won't work quite as well as it does on watercolor paper. So I'm just going to take a teeny piece of tape and I can rip it in half if I wish, long ways. Okay, so I'm just going to paint along the line. You can also put a piece of tape on the other side to create two sides of a triangle. So I will paint within those straight edges. I'm going to use a little bit of red. And I will just paint right over the tape and allow that to dry. The next one is a gradation or a gradient. A gradient is when you have a color and it slowly fades away. So I'm going to start with any color. I'm going to work with brown. And I will add a bit of water, a little bit more brown. And I'm going to paint brown and then slowly add water. So add some brown. Then I'm going to add some water. Tap the side of the water cup. Add some more water. And it should go from dark to light. Next is the crayon resist, which is my favorite. The wax will resist any of the paint that you put down. Like I said, use a lighter colored crayon so you can really see the effects. I would use yellow, white, maybe orange if you have it. White works the best in my opinion. So I'm just gonna, you can draw a shape. I'm just gonna draw a spiral. And now you can paint any color on top. Okay, and you can see that the green resisted anywhere where there was wax. The last is my favorite, one of my favorites, and that is the salt technique. You get a really cool chemical effect once everything dries, so you won't see the effect right away. So you're gonna quickly paint a color into your block and throw some salt down on it and let it dry. So I'm just gonna grab any color. I'm gonna try black this time, black mixed with brown. And I'm gonna add some salt quickly. Just a little pinch of salt. And you wanna allow this all to dry. If your 2-layer area is about dry, you can add a second layer onto that area. So it's up to you what you'd like to do. I'm going to add a little bit of a shadow onto my yellow circle there to make it look a bit like a sphere. I'm going to mix its opposite color on my palette with yellow. So the opposite of yellow is violet, and you can look at a color wheel for this to find the color opposites. So I'm gonna take some violet and I'm gonna mix a teeny bit of purple. I'm sorry, take some yellow, mix a teeny bit of purple. A little too much. You can see it darkens the yellow. And I'm just gonna shade the side to add a little bit of dimension. Okay, I'm gonna clean my water because it's getting quite dirty. If you can't see through your water and it looks like a swamp, it's time to dump and change out your water. Okay, we're back. So now I'm gonna add a little bit of value to my blue triangle. The opposite color of blue is orange. So I'm going to take some blue and mix it around my orange area. Clean my brush and add some orange. So you can see I get a very brown color. I'm gonna add a little bit more blue. And now I get like this nice dark bluish orange color. A little bit more blue. Okay, so we're gonna add that on the side of our shape to add a bit of dimension. On my 3D form, I want to add a shadow. We're going to add the opposite color into this color to make a shadow. So if I have an orange sphere, I want to mix the color orange and blue together. So we did that right here. So I'm just going to take a little bit more orange and a little bit more blue. And again, test these colors out if you're unsure of how they'll look. That looks pretty good for a shadow. And let's add it in the cast shadow area. I also want to add a little bit of a shadow to the side of my sphere, so I'm going to add more orange. and add orange to the side of the sphere. There's a little bit of blue in this orange. Keep that in mind. I'm gonna grab some water to kind of blend it out a bit. And if you feel like the shadow is a bit too light, add more color to it. The beauty of watercolor is you can rework and work on top because it's so translucent. You can let it dry, work on top, and continue. If you work next to two colors while they're both wet, sometimes you can get bleeding. You'll get more bleeding on watercolor paper because it does not sink in quite as fast as it does on computer paper. The water sinks in very fast on this paper. So there we have it. We have our first days done of all of the watercolors. Once you have your first attempts done, you can move on to your second attempts. Any area that is not finished, you can do that the following class. I'm going to remove the tape now that it appears dry. Because we're using computer paper, it can rip. But on watercolor paper, it's quite strong and it will not rip. Okay, we're pretty lucky here. Okay. This will be wet for about an hour, so you want to put it somewhere to dry, and you don't want to tilt it, so you want to keep it like this.